One of the things that I've always appreciated about you, though, is your insights. They've, in my opinion, been invaluable not only to the companies that you've worked for, but for the industry at large. So before you go, I do want to ask, what do you think the packaging industry needs desperately right now, and why?
That's really kind of you to say, number one. So I actually think the packaging industry is missing a little bit of a North Star, as I talked about earlier. I think the focus on the consumer, the intersection of the consumer and sustainability is not always coming together. And I feel like it's a lot of um, incremental ways, so I would say it's not bold thinking. It's a lot of small incremental steps and not grounded deeply in consumer. So I see a lot of things. I'll give an example, Lisa.
Yes,
You know,
please.
a lot of things about recycling or recycled PET or recycled whatever. Consumers don't even understand recycling. There's not the infrastructure for it. To me, we're discussing things that are not true. We're not true. Yeah, it's recyclable, but there's no system for it. So when you talk to consumers, that's not a fair discussion. So how are we helping really talk to consumers? How are we really meeting their needs and what's going on? What is really going to be the end state for the consumer? For example, in the United States, if we picked a geography, how are we really going to push the needle instead of saying that's the consumer's problem or that's this problem? The industry needs to come together with a true North Star and say what is really going to be the difference and ground that in consumer insights and foresights about what it will be the consumer behavior, because you will not change consumers' behaviors. You will not change them. You need to understand them and then be able to map to what they will do and make it easy for them to be, to do and enable them in the way that we just talked about the mayonnaise bottle, right? To do their
Yes.
job and
Yep.
make their life easy. Doing those things and being transformative can change the industry. And I think it's very incremental. We're being very incremental these days and not understanding the consumer richly and deeply, either in the design area of enabling new areas or the sustainability area. That's my own opinion. I think we've become very driven by cost and productivity, which is super important. I am never going to throw that out. There's always the right tension,
Yep.
but it's overwhelmingly so, to the sacrifice of innovation.
We've talked about a lot of what would be your North Star. And I understand the consumer aspect of it. I understand the people aspect of it, and you are very good at understanding the business of packaging as well. How do we bring the business of packaging in to all of that so that companies can turn a profit, make money, and continue to innovate with new products?
I do think understand the consumer leads everything. They
Okay.
have to be the bullseye of understanding. And then I think understanding the differences between what a consumer wants to have versus nice to have is where it's some of the delineation, and you can really tease apart cost, value, you know what I mean? And what are
Mhm.
the needs to have, because a lot of times we load things up and that drives a cost equation that's difficult, and I respect that tremendously. But if you are really delivering value for the consumer and understanding what creates value for the consumer, you will be able to realize what you need to realize. And then the things that don't, we should be stripping out in a way that is non-value added and taking the cost out from a productivity lens or however we can strip it. And I do see lots of times we've over-engineered things, including myself, because we put the belt, we don't know. So we add a lot of belts and suspenders, or I'm not sure what the shelf life is. Well, there's tons of opportunity to strip those things out and really understand statistically what's going on and what's the behaviors going on, and do a lot more rigor versus rush to do the right work there, and then be able to drive some cost out of maybe that part of the equation, but add benefit in to the design, aesthetic, or some other value that the consumer might get out of it. and really pinpoint that. But without really speaking and spending good time with the consumer, we don't ever tease those things apart. And packaging really doesn't get a seat at the table to understand the consumer. Product does, and obviously I led product development for a lot of time in my career. It's a very different level of robustness of understanding, and some of the companies I was at had a much better understanding, but by and large, our industry doesn't get to spend enough time with the consumer and get the richness of the dialogue from a foresight and insight and a true nuance. And I'd say that's the number one job to be done.
Isn't it as simple, though, of the product folks just sharing those consumer insights with the packaging folks? Wouldn't it be that easy? Talk
It's
about
really,
simplification.
it's really not. And considering I got to work in both areas, I was an advocate, and I still am. The packaging people really need to sit down themselves and understand. I remember I had the blessing at one of my companies to work on, to watch focus groups on one-handed opening caps and understanding the opening force and the details of how big that cap had to be in the person's hand and all that other. That's the nuances packaging people really need to know, because what is driving value? How big does it have to be? How not? Where can I shave resin? Where can I not? How important is that mold? That's where some of the costs come into the equation on some of these things, the intricacies of the molds, or I'm using that as an example for,
Sure.
as a proxy. Um, Without understanding and, talking to the consumer about those needs or going into their houses and watching how they're using the packaging in situ, I think, or talking to Walmart and going through their distribution network as an example, I think you don't really get it, the end-to-end piece. The product people are talking to them about the eating of the product and the sensory on their tongue. They're not including that dialogue and the intricacy of the package. And so you might be able to tag it together, and you should be able to, and you can, but I'm not sure that richness is always going to come through enough to what we get to be able to strip the costs out of packaging and make sure we're adding the value at the same time.
Any last words?
I think I've hammered it. It is all, I am so passionate about the consumer. It's all about the consumer.